Welcome to Smart Women Talk. This is your host, Katana Abbott. I'm a midlife millionaire coach and a certified financial planner, and I search the world for smart women and a few good men, including best-selling authors and thought leaders who are on that leading edge. So join us for conversations on money, business, health, and inspiration, so you can live with more purpose, passion, and prosperity. Hello, everyone. This is Katana, and I want to welcome you to Smart Women Talk. Today we have a wonderful guest. She is the author of Fear to Flow and the owner of Andria Corso and Company, which is a life and leadership coaching firm. We're going to talk about the book Fear to Flow, and she's going to talk about this idea of false fears. We're going to be talking about those fears that keep us stuck and struggling in life, and how to know if you're letting the false fears control your behavior and decisions. And then she has a very beautiful process to help you move through this and to overcome it. A couple of things I want to stay on track that we'll cover is how to discern when you're dealing with a false fear or a real fear, and to know if you're living in that false fear, and then how to move through the fear so it can stop driving your decisions, and what it means to live a life in flow. I'm very honored to be able to introduce you to Andria Corso, who is a award-winning life and leadership coach with 20 years experience of working with clients to develop leadership skills, to develop themselves, to advance their careers and businesses, and to create whole life success. She is the owner of Andria Corso and Company, which does life and leadership coaching, and they help people reach their highest potential. She is a best-selling author of Fear to Flow, How to Give Up Your Struggle and Allow Life to Unfold Perfectly. This is her third book. We're going to get right into this about how to start living in that divine flow of life. So Andria, welcome. I'm so happy we're finally connecting. We've been talking about this for such a long time.
I know, Katana. Thank you so much for having me.
Share with our listeners a little bit about your story and how you came to this moment where you decided to do what you're doing today and you decided to do this work in Fear to Flow.
My prior life was a corporate life for 15 years. The first 15 years of my career I spent in the corporate world, climbing the corporate ladder in the leadership development executive coaching arena. And then I left that corporate world. It just became a little bit too toxic for me. It wasn't where my heart was. And I decided to start my coaching business. And of course, when I started my coaching business, I started it as very much the leadership development, executive coaching. It was very similar to what I was doing in the corporate world, only it was external. And that slowly morphed into much more of what I do today, which is the life coaching. I still do a lot of leadership development work, but it's more on within the personal development life coaching. So very different than just going in and doing executive coaching for a bunch of leaders. It's helping people reconnect with their most authentic selves and then lead and live from that place. So it's been a transition, and I think we all have those moments where we realize, I want to be doing something different. This isn't it for me. Something feels off. It feels like that itch. And I've had a couple of those in my life. One, obviously, when I was in the corporate world, and then one it seemed like a much bigger one when my father got very sick and then passed away, which prompted the writing of my book, Fear to Flow, and leading me into this new phase of my work, which is, again, helping people overcome fear and step into the divine flow of life.
I'm going to switch the roles here, and I want you to tell us a little bit about your experience. What happened with you? And it could be the one at corporate or the other one. How did you know that, oh my gosh, this is a defining moment and I have to make a huge change? And then how did you deal with the fear yourself?
When my father got sick, so my relationship with my dad was one where very loving but very complicated, and basically I was living, I felt like his life, his dream, his definition of success. He was a very strong influence in my life, and so when he got sick, he got pancreatic cancer after living a life, and he was very healthy and health conscious and fit for most of his life, all of my life. And so when he got pancreatic cancer and then passed away a very short 5 months later, literally for me, it was like the foundation of my life, of what I knew to be true. Like everything just collapsed beneath me. And I was not quite sure who Andria was outside of how I had been defining myself all along according to what he expected of me. And yes, I was in my early 40s, so this is not a young child, but really in my 40s. And I realized, wow, I don't know who I am outside of the definitions that he had created for me. And that's actually when I realized I was living my life from these false fears. I realized I was afraid to make different decisions and different choices that kind of went against societal norms, cultural norms, how I was raised. I was afraid of loss. I was afraid of losing control. I was afraid of failing. All of those, I realized that, oh my goodness, I've been making all of these decisions because I was afraid of a potential consequence that really did not have any immediate basis in reality, but were stories I was creating in my head from beliefs that I had picked up and latched onto throughout the prior 2 to 3 decades of my life. So that was the defining moment. My fear showed up. It was, didn't want to feel it, didn't want to pay attention to it, just wanted it to go away so I would make the decision that I believed would avoid that potential consequence of the fear coming true. Even though my heart might have been pulling me in one direction, the fear was totally driving my behavior. I had physical injuries. I had a year-long battle with a foot injury. So the fear will show up, and it will manifest in our bodies eventually if we don't pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah. And also one of the things you talk about too is these experiences that we have when we're young. If we're acting out on fears based on false beliefs that were formed early in life and we don't even know that they're not true or we don't even realize that's what's happening, we could be numbing down those feelings because they're there with things like alcohol, drugs, food, overworking, over shopping, all kinds of codependent relationships where we're maybe numbing out with a person.
Oh yeah, completely. Busyness, excessive busyness was a big one for me.
Okay.
The busier I was, the more I just couldn't stop. I kept going. I believe the more I kept doing, then the less likelihood that something would, surprise me or I'd lose control or I'd fail. So busyness, it's like I was running from the fear that I didn't want to face.
So you say that fear is driving most of our behaviors. So you had this going on with you. How did you take your corporate coaching, your leadership coaching, and turn it into this specific area? Was it something specific that happened? You said, oh my gosh, this is key. I'm going to write a book about it.
Again, I think the experience of going through my father's illness and having this wake-up call about how I was living my life, I started to see it so much in not only my clients, but also friends, colleagues. It's like you recognize something about yourself and suddenly you're surrounded by it. So I realized that so many of the clients that I had been working with in the corporate world were feeling trapped and stuck and struggling, like they wanted to make different decisions, not only about their life, but about their leadership role, but they were afraid. So they were afraid, if I push back or if I make this decision, I might alienate some people, or I might not get the next promotion, or I might get overlooked. So there's a lot of decisions that, again, I recognize people making to avoid a potential consequence of something that might not ever happen. And that's usually, with false fear, that's usually the case. We make the stories up in our head. We carry them out to the point where they keep us paralyzed. One of my clients once there was a situation going on where he really wanted to push back on his leadership, and he was afraid because he said, if I push back, even though I know this is the right thing to do, I probably won't get that promotion, or they're going to even demote me. again, this was a decorated employee, someone who'd been with the organization a very long time, very successful, and yet a fear of something he was making up in his head was keeping him from acting not only in his best interest, but really within his team's best interest. And I started to see these things and work with people on, okay, so let's go there. Let's talk about that. Let's figure out what would you actually do if that fear came true. And again, I write about that process in the book, how you actually move through the fear so that it does not drive your behavior. It doesn't mean the fear doesn't show up again, right? We're human, so we're going to constantly be confronted with things that scare us, even if it is a story we're making up in our head. But the idea is to learn enough about how it affects us, how it's driving our behavior, and then how to move through it so that we can choose differently. So we don't let fear decide for us what we need.
And so we're so afraid of that feeling or that experience that we've made up in our head, right? That we numb it out rather than, you don't even have to go experience it in the real world. You could actually just, is what you're saying, is experience it, let's say, by imagining it and seeing how it feels and then seeing how, okay, that wasn't so horrible. Okay, what if I do the program and it really stinks? Oh, I'm not going to die, but what if it's great? What if it is great? Oh my gosh, I could end up really happy and move on in life and go to the next stage.
And that's the beautiful thing, is that when we actually stop for a minute, and the first thing I tell people is just acknowledge the fact that you're afraid. Just admit it. Call it out, because when you name it, and you claim it, you name it, you claim it, and it actually starts to lose some of its power just by acknowledging it. So we acknowledge it, and then we say, okay, what if, like you said, what if the program flops, or what if my business fails? That was a big one for me when I first started my business, as I believe it is with many entrepreneurs. What if my business fails? All right, what if it fails? How is that going to make you feel? And so it's going to feel awful. I'm going to feel ashamed, embarrassed. I'm going to feel like a failure. I'm going to be disappointed. But then what would you do? Like, what would you actually do if the fear came true? And what we find out is, like you said, in 98% of the cases, you're going to live. I'll live. It might not be easy, but I'll pick up the pieces. I'll figure out what to do next. And with money, it's like people are afraid, my business is going to fail and then I'm not going to be able to pay the bills. Really? Is that really true? Just because a business fails, does that mean you're not going to be able to pay your bills? Then people are like, I guess not. I could find another way to make money. Exactly. We create the stories that just make the fear enormous when we really, if we just examined it and explored it a little bit, we discover, oh, wait a minute. I'm pretty resilient, and in most cases, I will survive. And then that enables us to hopefully not allow fear to drive the behavior.
Wow. Yeah. There is real fear and there's false fear. I know you go into that.
Okay. So real fear is what you feel if you wake up in the middle of the night and your smoke detectors are going off, or you smell smoke in your house, or if you start to lose control of your car, or if you feel like the tremor of an earthquake. It's literally when the part of our brain that initiates the fear response, which is the amygdala, it sends signals to our body that we are in danger. So there's immediate danger. Our heart starts to pump more blood to our muscles. Our lungs need more oxygen. The adrenaline kicks in. So all the fight or flight reactions and responses from the body kick in. That is real fear. We are in immediate danger, and we need to protect ourselves. We are born with that. It keeps us alive, and it's really important. That is fear we want. False fear is, like I was talking about, it's the fear that comes from the stories that we make up in our head, or from worries that we pick up on because of what we see around us. The acronym that I like to use is false evidence appearing real. And it's not something we are born with. It is something that we learn. We learn to fear things that aren't real or that don't have an immediate basis in reality. But we create stories that they do. I always say, look at why did that happen to me? What am I going to learn from this? And unfortunately, sometimes we don't know the reasons why bad things happen, but when we look back, it can and usually does make sense. I talk about that a lot in the book, how the dots connect when you look back, that famous Steve Jobs quote. He says, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will connect in your future. And if you think about your life, even the most horrific things that have happened, when you're in the middle of them, experiencing them, you're there like thinking, this is never going to be feel right, be right, make sense to me. And I can tell you, for me personally, for many of my clients, when you look back, those things make sense. It's like you can see how the dots connected. You can see why you went through that really rough time. You can see how you came through that really rough time, what you learned from it, how you grew. So when those scary things that we don't think can happen but happen occur, if we can be in those moments and say, I know this is going to make sense to me eventually. And when my father was sick and dying, I could not have imagined that would ever make sense. I'm 2 years beyond it now, and it does actually make sense to me.
And I think that happens with time normally.
Exactly.
And then we can find the gift. We can find the gift in it. Could you please share a little bit of your process with us?
I'll share with you my process because it's the first step, right? It's to move through fear. And I write about it obviously in much greater detail in the book, but it's a 5-step process where the first thing you want to do is actually sit with and acknowledge your feelings. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. We tend to avoid or stuff the fear aside. And you can really use this for any negative emotion. We do it a lot with anger or sadness. Those emotions don't feel good. We don't want to feel them, so we ignore them. And the fact is that emotions, emotion, energy in motion, they need to move. So the only way your emotions are going to move through your body is if you first acknowledge them, sit with them, allow them to be felt. And that's really the second step. So the first thing is you just acknowledge it, and then the second thing is you allow it to be felt without judgment. This might be a hard one, especially I think many women, we judge ourselves for not being happy or being able to take care of everybody, and allow yourself to have the moment or moments of, I'm feeling scared, I want to cry, I'm just going to let myself feel this. It's not right or wrong. It just feel it. And the third step is then to go to the depths of the fear. And we talked about this earlier. I mentioned it. And this is literally when you say, okay, what would I do? I'm really afraid. I'm feeling this emotion. Where am I feeling it? I'm feeling it in my heart. I'm feeling it in my stomach, my neck. Because you can feel it in your body if you let yourself feel it. The body knows. And so you recognize it in your body. Then you say, what would I do if this actually happened, just like we talked about earlier? And then you want to, fourth step, move the fear out of your body. And you can do this a couple of ways. You can simply visualize it. So if you like to meditate, and as you're sitting there and just allowing yourself to feel what you're feeling, figuring out what you would do if it actually came true, just visualize it exiting your body. Where are you feeling it? If you're feeling it in your heart, maybe just see it leaving that area. Or if it's in your shoulders, just see the tension melting away from your shoulders. The other way is to literally move your body. If you like to walk or hike or run, I run. Just the next time you are working out or you're going to go on a hike or go on a walk, just set the intention. I'm going to move any fearful emotion out of my body. And your body will know what to do. It's helpful if in that moment that you're feeling it, certainly if you can get up and move and let it get out of your body that way, perfect. But if not, because we're not always in a situation where we can get up and move when we're feeling a certain emotion, then just set the intention next time you're working out or doing something physical that you're going to move that emotion out of your body, and that fearful emotion is going to just leave your body. And then the last step is really to get support. One of the things that I've discovered both personally and with clients is sometimes feeling these things, they could be old emotions that are buried deep that we've been carrying around. For me personally, I carried around some of these fears for 30 years. I needed support, and I wasn't afraid to admit that. After my father died and I was dealing with fear, grief, anger, I got grief counseling support. And certainly family, friends, there are great support networks, but sometimes you might need professional help, whether it's a counselor, a therapist, a coach, a mentor. Just you don't have to do it alone. I think that's, sometimes we think, oh, I could do this, I could do it alone, but there's a lot of people out there who can support you as you work through uncomfortable emotions, including fear. It's not very comfortable. So obviously I go through a lot more detail of each of those steps of the process in the book, but that's like a general overview.
Beautiful. What would you like to share as your closing tip?
To not be afraid of your fear, to look at it as a gift and something that is going to teach you about what your next step is. Acknowledge it, almost befriend it. I always tell people, just befriend your fear, because the more we resist it, the more it persists and will drive our behaviors. Don't be afraid of your fear. Just allow it to speak to you and move you to your next step.
Yeah, and I think the gift is the fact that you actually know what it is. Everyone, we hope you enjoyed the show. And until next week, we want to invite you to live with more purpose, passion, and prosperity. Smart Women Talk is brought to you by Smart Women's Empowerment, a 501c3 nonprofit project of United Charitable. Music by Bill Lucas from his album When It Rains. Available on Apple Music and Spotify. Catch us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, and be sure to join our free community at joinsmartwomen.com to access all our free Smart Women resources.